Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese says if he's elected, he'll have an ICAC by the end of the year. What do you think on that time frame? But over the last few days, have you reflected on your comments on ICAC? Would you make this a priority if you're re-elected?
Well, our policy on a Commonwealth Integrity Commission is very clear, and that's our policy. And we're taking that policy to the election. I'm not taking... Yeah, I would seek to implement that, and I'd need the support of the parliament to do it, just like I needed in this parliament. But that is our policy, and we have a detailed... Hang on, settle. There's a detailed plan. It's detailed legislation, over 300 pages in length. Labor's plan for an integrity commission is a 2-page fluff sheet. So we have a very serious policy, and we're putting that to the election. At the last election, what I said we would seek to put one in place, we said we'd put one in. We developed a policy, we developed detailed legislation. Labor Party didn't agree with it. And at this election, you have a very clear and detailed policy when it comes to how we want to progress with that issue. As I've said, you know I'm very critical of some of the ICACs, particularly in New South Wales, which tended to focus on trying to run one of the best premiers we've seen in our state, who came through and led Australia in New South Wales through that pandemic. And she got run off the rails by a campaign against her, focusing on who her boyfriend was. I don't think that's what we need. I think what we need is a proper integrity commission that is driven by the processes of the rule of law, that doesn't seek to judge people before they're able to have their matters properly considered. And that is a sensible policy we've put forward. That is our policy going forward. And I think it sits in stark contrast. I mean, if Anthony Albanese says he's going to introduce legislation, well, what is it? I know what my legislation is. I have no idea what his legislation is, because he's had 3 years to develop it and he doesn't even have a private member's bill. This guy just doesn't do the work. He just doesn't do the work.
Did you say that the New South Wales ICAC was a kangaroo court when it investigated Eddie Obeid and Ian McDonald?
Well, the courts ended up investigating Eddie Obeid and he went to prison. And Ian McDonald from the Labor Party went to prison, and Eddie Obeid went to prison, and these gentlemen were pursued through the Parliament and ICAC. But I am from New South Wales, and I've seen how they have operated over a very long time. And I'm just saying that the model in New South Wales is not a model that I would support federally. The model I support federally, I have set out in very detailed legislation, and that is in stark contrast to a Labor Party that hasn't even come up with a bill or a legislation, and he's had 3 years to do it. He hasn't done his homework. He hasn't got across his brief on this. It's 2-page fluff versus over 300 detailed pages of legislation. And that legislation is my policy. That's what I'm putting to the election, and that's what I would hope to put to the Parliament.
Prime Minister, why should Labor vote for you? Why should Labor vote for you when you've had a whole term to implement this and you haven't? They're going to the election saying we're going to do it in the first year. Why should both?
We win this election, Labor should support my policy.
Prime Minister,